Hi dude, wants to new tutorial about modularity coming.
I'm sorry, the demons told me to not make tutorials for free anymore. They said I need to make money now.
Dude, what you should talk about? What demons? Don't talk shit, just create the tutorial, skip me the modularity videos. I wanna see modularity, create more videos.
Hello there, and welcome to this overview video on modularity. Now, why do I do an overview video and don't just post the first part of this tutorial series? I've already finished the first part earlier, but I've realized it was way too long. I don't really want to make tutorials that are 60 minutes or 40 minutes long, as I feel like that's not the length a YouTube video should have, especially on simple tasks as these first parts of my modularity series. So I sat down and thought about what are the reasons for this video being so long. Now the main reason is that I've covered too much basic stuff in that video that I should have covered before, like with my other overview videos, and that's what I do right here. So what is modularity? Modularity basically refers to the reusability of assets, especially the attachability or connectability, and so you have bigger possibilities on creating new structures from already existing geometry. This is usually used when you have to create big levels or a lot of structures quick, and oftentimes in games where you don't see these things for long. So if you have something like a top-down scrolling game and you have a city built and you don't want to create every single building by hand, you just create a basic few parts and create buildings from those and then scatter them around the scene. In this series I'd like to cover two main ideas of modularity. The first being finished models that have unique textures that can't be reused, but the models themselves are able to interconnect with each other. So they have suitable origin points, which we will talk about in a second, or they have the right trim textures to create a nice transition between the models. Again, the difference to other modular parts is that you can't reuse the texture as it's specifically made for this model. If you, for example, baked in ambient occlusion, you usually won't be able to reuse this texture with a different model. So that's going to be the subject of the first few parts of this tutorial series, and the later parts will cover a more general idea of modularity, where we will create texture atlases that contain only the basic diffuse information and thus can be reused over a vast amount of assets. So we only create one big texture and then we can reuse that for every asset we use, and so every asset will have the same kind of feeling, the same kind of style. And if you then want to bake in ambient occlusion, there are also tricks for that using vertex color and those things. But this will then be the subject of these tutorials. Both levels of modularity have a few things in common. The first being that the origin placement is very important. Now at the end I'll provide a link where you can read more about that and some more specific examples, but in this video I'd just like to show you why this matters so much. The origin placement will decide on where your object snaps to and where it rotates around. So you want to specify the place it has to snap to, which is usually an axis of symmetry, so the place it's tiling at, and you want to specify the place it rotates around. So for corners, you want to select the corner part to be the origin, so you don't rotate it in a wrong way that doesn't fit the grid anymore. Now, this is obviously very different for a lot of assets, but a rule of thumb is that you place the origin at the point it has to anchor to the surface, to the next surface, as well as the tiling point. So if you, for example, create something that's standing on the floor, you want to put the origin to the bottom surface of this object, so that the level artist or you later just need to kind of move this around and it will snap to the surface. If you create, for example, a lamp that's hanging from the ceiling, you want to make sure that the origin is on top of the object. So for example, if you rotate it, it's rotating at the right anchor point. This way you can also predefine the anchor place of the object in height, for example. If you set the origin to always link to the floor part, you can move the object in its height, so it will always link to the correct height and you don't need to worry about it not tiling perfectly. Now you can obviously also reverse this. If you move it down, it will always anchor to the either ceiling or floor. So this way you can predefine, for example, the height at which an object should be attached to another one. The next thing you want to make sure when creating modular assets is to plan ahead, and this is very important. You want to set the same scale and the same grid size for every object, so that you don't have some weird transformations later and need to readjust everything by hand by moving vertices. For example, that you don't create a wall tile that's 4x4 and a floor tile that's 3x3, as these only will work together when multiplying them with each other, so you need 4 floor tiles and 3 wall tiles until they seam again perfectly. Now in some cases you can change the scale. Maybe you need a 3x3 floor tile because you have a different asset that will then perfectly create the transition between this and the next object. But for general assets you want to make sure that all the sizes fit to the grid. Now you don't need to worry about what scale the grid size is at, because in most engines you can just easily rescale the assets, because when creating a 1x1 asset, it doesn't matter if it's centimeters or meters you create your objects at, because it's obviously very easy to scale those by multipliers of 10. So that's it for the basics I'd like to cover. Again, to repeat, make sure to place the origins at the right points. Always use the grid as a guide so you can make sure that all the models perfectly interconnect with each other. And you should keep in mind that there are basically two ways of creating modularity. Either you have independent models with independent textures that interconnect with each other due to their perfectly aligning textures and geometry, but you can't reuse the textures. Or you have models that use the same texture over and over, which will then make it necessary to create some extra geometry and some extra textures to create unique assets, so it's not too visible that you reuse the same texture over and over, which I will obviously cover, but you will also increase performance and have more flexibility, as you only will use one texture atlas, and you don't need to recreate every texture for every object. Alright, that's already it. I just wanted to cover the very basics of modularity. I will attach some links to the description where you can read a bit more about it and get some basic knowledge so you can follow these upcoming tutorials easier. I hope this was already a quite interesting overview, and stay tuned for the tutorial series. Thanks for watching.
You must construct additional pylons.